What's going on, guys? This is Nick bringing you a Mutant combo tutorial slash discussion video. Mainly more of a discussion video than a combo tutorial because Mutant is a control deck and there really isn't a good way to showcase a combo, mainly because there really isn't one. You kind of just draw a bunch of back row, set and pass, and control the game from there, so it's not that entertaining to do test hands with. But what I do mainly want to focus on is discussing why I think Mutant is a really great rogue contender, not only in this particular format that we're in currently, but just in general because of the inherent playstyle the deck has. So with that being said, let's grab a seat, like, subscribe to the video if you haven't already, and let's divulge into the world of Mutant. For those of you who are unaware, Mutant are a attribute, or they're psychic type water attribute monsters, and Mo5 and St46 are specifically your starters slash extenders of the deck. So obviously you max out at 3 copies on both of these. Something to note though is that because they are both level 3 or lower psychic monsters, you are able to fetch these cards off of the newly semi-limited emergency teleport, which we do play 2 of in the main deck, obviously. So this just, again, further increases the consistency and the ceiling of the deck overall, because now, instead of playing 3 copies of Mo5 and 3 copies of St46, you're effectively playing 5 copies of it, of each, which again is just really, really cool. Any deck that can play E-Telly, play E-Telly, because this card is too good not to play. But with that being said, let's talk a little bit about what Mo5 and St46 do specifically. So in Mo5's case, when he is normal or special summoned, you get to add a mutant monster from the deck to your hand, except a copy of himself. So initially on summon, he's a +1. And the card you're usually going to be searching for off of that effect is St46. Moving on to St46, again, if this card is normal or special summoned, you can add a mutant, spell, or trap from the deck to your hand. So again, another +1 on summon. Between the two, I personally feel that St46 is the better card, or the better one to see. However, that doesn't mean that Mo5 is bad, because Mo5 gets you to St46 anyway. But they both have secondary effects, which are the same for each one. So I'm only going to read one of them as follows, because, you know, Mo5 and St46 have the same secondary effect. And that effect reads as follows. You contribute this card you control, and then banish a card from your hand or field. Then you can special summon from your hand or deck the appropriate monster based on the type of card banished. If you banished a monster card, you can summon Mutant Beast. If you banished a spell card, you can summon Mutant Mist. And if you banished a trap card, you can summon Mutant Arsenal. We'll get into what the big guys do shortly, but let's wrap things up on the small starters. I think Mutant is pretty cool for their playstyle. You have to understand that these cards that you're summoning from your deck, they're main deck boss monsters, which is great because this deck, what that means is that this deck doesn't lose to stuff like the Artifact Scythe block that is currently seeing more and more play in the format, thanks to cards like Destiny Hero Phoenix Enforcer. Artifact Scythe is seeing a lot of play, and it's spiking through the roof. And it's very difficult to play through the Scythe lock. So decks that heavily rely on their extra deck end up suffering pretty badly. Whereas Mutant, even though we play an extra deck, and we do have in Archetype extra deck boss monsters like Ultimus and Synthesis, we don't have to summon those cards. We're able to put pressure with our main deck monsters, which I think is really, really great. And again, we'll get into what they do in a second, but each one of these has really cool individual effects. Mutant also has a brand new main deck monster coming out in Battle of Chaos, I believe, which is the upcoming mainline booster set, which we'll probably see here in the TCG in February, I think, of 2022. That card is absolutely insane, and it pushes Mutants to be even better than what they already are. And what makes it cool is that Mo5 is able to search it. So when that card comes out, Mo5 gets even better because now he not only can search for ST46, but can also search for that new card that we're not really going to talk about right now because, again, the card's not out in the TCG, but just know that that new card is pretty gas. I think the OCG translation was Mutant Mutator, but again, we don't know what the official TCG name will be until we actually see the card here. So anyway, with that being said, that's it for the starters. You have Mo5 and ST46. Each one goes +1 on summon, and then they have the same secondary effect where you can fetch a certain type of mutant boss based on the card you banished. And actually, going back to that, I think it's pretty cool that you can banish any card. You don't have to banish specifically mutant cards for these effects. You can banish any spell, any monster, any trap you have from your hand or field, which I think adds to the unique playstyle of the deck. And it also allows you to tinker with stuff. Because if you notice too, none of these starters or extenders lock you into anything specifically. Like, you're not archetype locked, you're not attribute locked, and you're not locked into a specific type either. So you have a lot of freedom to play with like different tech choices and whatnot, which I think is really, really cool and good for a deck to have, to be able to have longevity and not get power crept so easily. So that's it for the starters. Now let's move into the big boys. We got Arsenal, we got Mist, and we got Beast. I guess we'll start from left to right. Arsenal's the card you summon if you banish the trap. He is the biggest of the main deck mutants, coming in at 3,000 attack. He cannot be targeted by opponents' trap cards or effects, which I think is cool. So they can't impermanence this, they can't dogmatic punishment this, it cannot get Phantom Knight Fogbladed, to name a few examples, which I think is great. Also, as a quick effect, when your opponent activates a monster effect, you can banish a card in your hand or that you control. Note that you can also banish the Arsenal himself as costs for that, and you get to target a monster the opponent controls and banish it. Note that you do not have to specifically target and banish the monster that activated, you just have to target and banish any monster they have on their field, which I think is great. It targets, which is kind of whatever, but at least it banishes the card, so it avoids like destruction effects and whatnot, which I think is great. Also, if Arsenal gets destroyed by an opponent's card, whether that be battle or card effect, you get to target one of your banished mutant spells and add it to your hand. So Arsenal's really, really great. Also, something else I forgot to mention is that all three of the mutant bosses, they're all level 8s, and each one of them cannot be special summoned except with the effect of a mutant card. But that does not mean that you can't tribute summon these. You can still do that. Granted, in testing, that's never happened, and it probably never will, but just know that you have the option to tribute summon these cards from your hand if that does come up. But that's it for Arsenal. Other than that, it's a pretty great card. Then we have Mist. Now, Mist is one that I've seen a lot of debate with. A lot of people say that Mist isn't worth playing. I beg to differ. I think Mist does have a place in the deck, not only as an additional name, but an additional attribute, but also because specifically of its attribute and its typing. Mist happens to be a wind attribute, which for those of you who are playing currently in meta, should know that Fluunderies and Tri-Brigade, Lyra Lusk, those types of decks, all of those like to double down on their wind barrier statue plays. This card is a wind, which means that we have a very easy out to the wind barrier statue lock in Archetype. We just banish a spell off of Mo5 or ST46's secondary effect, and then special the Mist, and we, voila, have a 2700 beat stick on field that can contest the barrier statue. And not only that, but also cannot be targeted by an opponent's spell cards, which means they can't Forbidden Chalice this. And in addition to that, as a quick effect, when your opponent activates a trap card or trap effect, you can banish a card you control or that you have in your hand. Again, Mist can banish himself for that cost. And if you do, draw 2 cards. So each time your opponent, it's a once per turn effect, but each time your opponent activates a trap, you get a Pot of Greed. That is really, really good against control matchups. Decks like Eldritch, decks like Altergeist, which we'll see more play, because now they're getting that new Altergeist Pukari, I think is the name, coming out of Brothers of Legend. So be ready for your going to locals and seeing more Altergeist players. I think Mist is going to be really, really good in those types of matchups. Just getting like a free draw 2 every time a trap's activated, I think is really, really great, and just feeds into this deck's grind game and out-resourcing capabilities, which I think is cool. And then also, if Mist gets destroyed by an opponent's card, whether it be battle or by card effect, you can target one of your banished mutant monsters and add it back to your hand. So that's it for Mist. Moving on to Beast. Beast, in my opinion, is the best of the three, despite having the lowest stats, unironically. It's a 2400 attack and defense, which again isn't terrible, but I think 2400 is fine. It's about as low as I'll go for a boss monster in particular. Any lower than that, and it's just getting ran over by a bunch of shit. But I think Beast is cool because his effect, well, he cannot be targeted by an opponent's monster effects, which I think is great. So they can't like Veiler this, for example, which I think is great. But his effects are secondary effect is probably the most valuable one you have at your disposal. As a quick effect, when your opponent would activate a spell card or spell effect, you can banish a card you control or have in your hand, negate that activation, and if you do, banish that spell. I told you guys earlier that Mutant is a control type of deck. And for those of you who are familiar with control decks, you know that they play lots of back row cards to control the game. Things like Impermanences and Solemn Strikes and whatever other cards they want to main deck to play their control play style. The problem with control decks, though, is they all inherently fall to back row removal. You have your Lightning Storms, you have Harpy's Feather Duster, you have Twin Twisters, Cosmic Cyclones. All those cards completely eviscerate back row matchups. Because they're just so strong and they're able to like blow you out. So that way the opponent can play their game and not have to worry about, whatever traps and shit you had lined up. What's cool about Beast is that you have an in archetype. Again, you're not jumping through hoops to put these cards on field necessarily. They're all in archetype, in engine. You have an in archetype way to put a spell negation. And it's not only just a negation, it negates and banishes. So like even if the spell card that you negated had like some kind of graveyard effect, it doesn't even matter. It negates and banishes. So like those cards like Lightning Storms and Twin Twisters that your opponent likes to side in for game 2 when they see you're playing a control deck, gonna have a pretty hard time trying to get through a Beast when you can just negate those cards and keep your back row alive. So I think the fact that this deck has a really good in archetype way to protect from blowout cards like that is a huge boost. Something that most other control decks can't capitalize on. I mean, the only way that most control decks are playing around those types of cards is through stuff like Solemn Judgment, I guess. And that card is such a steep cost of paying half your points, where it just puts you closer to being OTK'd, depending on the matchup you're facing. So I think having Beast be the spell negate is really, really cool for the deck. Not only that, if Beast gets destroyed by an opponent's card, you can target a banished mutant trap and add it to your hand. So overall, you have really good utility among your boss monsters. Very good toolbox type of effects. You have Arsenal that can banish monsters. Mist gets you a draw 2 when a trap is activated. And Beast is just a spell negate, which is really, really cool. Also note that they're all level 8s. So this allows for rank 8 plays, which is pretty nice. And none of them lock you into anything specific, which I think is also cool too. So you have a lot of freedom to mess around and tinker with stuff in terms of like your extra deck plays and whatnot. But let's jump into the in-archetype fusion monsters they have. We have Mutant Synthesis and Mutant Ultimus. These are the only two in-archetype fusions they have currently. We'll talk about Synthesis first. Synthesis is the one you're usually going to be summoning a majority of the time, just because it's the easier one of the two to get on field, only requiring 2 mutant monsters with different attributes. So it's not that hard to accomplish. It's a 2500 body, which again isn't the most attack, but it's nothing to scoff at either. And upon fusion summon, you get to target any card on the field and destroy it. So that's pretty cool. Like this card already comes out, messing shit up for your opponent. The moment it hits the board, it's already trying to take something out. What I really like about this card is its card design. It's got a very unique secondary effect that I have yet to see on any type of card outside of maybe like Masterpiece, but the application's a little bit different. So let me explain that. So basically, when your opponent activates any card or effect, as a quick effect, Synthesis can become immune, or unaffected, I should say, by cards or effects of that same type that was activated, whether it's monster, spell, or trap. So I guess in layman's terms, if your opponent activates a spell card, you can chain Synthesis as a quick effect, and Synthesis is now unaffected by all of your opponent's spell effects for the remainder of the turn. And the same thing with traps and monsters. You chain, if they activate a monster effect, Synthesis is now unaffected by all monster effects for the remainder of the turn. I think that's a very cool card design, And it makes this card a lot more difficult to out than you would initially think. Because anything you throw at this card to deal with it, it can just quick effect chain and make itself immune to cards of that particular type. Which means that in order for your opponent to actually out this card, they have to waste more resources on it than they initially thought. And again, if you're playing a control deck, your goal is to out-resource your opponent. So when they have to waste additional cards to deal with a threat like this, you're just sitting there laughing because you already know that like they're gonna lack a follow-up. Because they're putting so many cards into this just to get it off the board. And even when they do get it off the board, it still floats. If this card is destroyed by battle or by a card effect, an opponent's card by battle or card effect, let me be specific, I can target any banished mutant card and add it to my hand. So I think Synthesis is a very, very great control tool to utilize in this deck. And then we also have the big Mac Daddy himself, Mutant Ultimus. Now, Ultimus, you're really not going to summon that often, but when you do summon Ultimus, you're closing out that game for sure. No doubt about it. Ultimus is a dark, level 10 psychic type monster with 3,500 attack and 3,000 defense. Just really big stats for no reason. I mean, Ultimus can basically contest anything you'll come across this format by battle pretty much, just because of how much attack he actually has. There really isn't anything being summoned in this format that surpasses 3,500 or even comes close to it, I think. With that being said, though, Ultimus is a little bit more difficult to summon, requiring 3 level 8 or higher mutant monsters as the fusion material. What's interesting about this, though, is that it doesn't have to be like different names or different attributes. Unlike Synthesis, where he requires different attributes to be summoned. This can just be any 3 level 8 or higher mutants you have. What this card does, though, is really nice. He's like a souped-up version of Invoke Mechaba. Basically, when your opponent activates a card or effect, as a quick effect, you can banish a mutant card of the same card type, whether it's monster, spell, trap, either from your hand, from your field, or from your graveyard, to negate that activation, and if you do, banish that card. So that's a very cool type of Omni-Negate. Like I said, it's even better than Invoke Mechaba, because Mechaba needs the correct type of card in hand to, discard to negate. Well, this guy doesn't care. He just needs the same type of card, either in the hand, in the field, or in the graveyard. And then he negates and banishes it. So Ultimus is just a house, and he also floats on destruction. If he's destroyed by an opponent's card, whether that be battle or card effect, you can target up to one of each of your different types of mutant banished mutant cards, whether it's monster, spell, trap, and add them to your hand. So like if you have a banished trap and a banished spell and a banished monster, if Ultimus dies, you get to target all 3 of those and add each one back to your hand, which is pretty damn insane, if you ask me. But that's basically it for the mutant monsters. I just think the deck overall is a very cool control deck, and I think it's pretty decent. Like I said, this format, I mean, it doesn't lose to the Scythe Lock, which is seeing a lot of play now. If you get Artifact Scythe, you still have really formidable main deck monsters to go into. It doesn't lose to Barrier Statue because you have an Archetype Wind boss. It doesn't even get punished by going up against like Shaddoll, for example, because if you're usually ending on like one of these 3 guys or 2 of them, if you opened like exceptionally well, and none of these guys are extra deck monsters. So if they have Shaddoll Fusion, they can only fusion summon using materials from their hand or field. They can't fuse using materials from deck because you don't control a monster summoned from the extra deck, which I think is cool. So there's like a lot of niche interactions that like a lot of people don't realize at surface level, where Mutant actually comes out shining really well. And I just think, like I said, the deck has a very cool play style, and depending on how you build the deck, if you're playing a lot of control cards, I'm choosing to main deck Crackdown. I'm playing Solemn Strikes, obviously. D-Shifters, again, this deck doesn't care about banishing and stuff, so D-Shifter is just a house. This will end people's turns, this format. I mean, it's just a really good deck. There can be only one. I main deck this, again, because mutants don't care about it. All their monsters are different types, so it's very easy to play under TC Boo while your opponent struggles. because a lot of the decks that are in the format right now are all monotype. You know, Sword Soul's all Worm, Phantom Knight's all Warriors. You know, you have Fluunderies is all Wing Beasts. So those decks have a very hard time playing under Tisibu, which I think is a very great control card this format. For those of you that are curious on my build, I will leave a link to my deck profile in the description below, so feel free to check that out. But before we close out the video, let's just do a really quick 2-card combo, so you guys can kind of see a little bit of what Mutant is able to do under the right conditions. So in my hand here, I have 2 cards. I have Mo5 and I have the field spell that they have in Archetype, Mutant Evolution Lab. So we're going to go ahead and normal summon Mo5, activate the effect on summon to search a mutant monster from deck to hand. In this case, we're going to grab a copy of ST46. Then I'm going to use the secondary effect of Mo5, tributing himself and banishing a card from my hand or field as cost. In this case, I'll banish the ST46 from my hand that I searched off the Mo5. And I did that so that way I can summon Mutant Beast from my deck. So now we already have a spell negate on board, behind a formidable body as well, 24/24, are its stats. But now we can activate our field spell we have here, Mutant Evolution Lab. This card states that when you activate this card, you're able to special summon up to one of your level 4 or lower mutant monsters that's either in your hand or that's banished to your field. So we're going to special summon our banished ST46 that we banished off of our Mo5. And since we special summoned ST46, we'll activate the effect to search for a mutant spell trap. Now there's a few good ones. We have Mutant Expansion, which is like an in-archetype emergency teleport for your starters, with the added benefit of giving your level 8 or higher mutants protection from card effect destruction, which is cool. We have an in-archetype fusion spell, which on the surface is just you fuse by banishing materials from your hand or field. Not that great. What makes this card really cool, though, is if your opponent has activated any card or effect this turn, you're able to use up to 1 material each from your deck and graveyard to fuse. So what happens is if your opponent activated any type of card or effect on your turn during any phase, you're able to, this card becomes like a Shaddoll fusion and a Miracle fusion combined, which is just crazy because now you can fuse using from your deck, your grave, your hand, your field, doesn't even matter. And because it's a fusion spell in name, you're able to pitch this off of a Verte, which we also play in the extra deck, which is pretty crazy. Then we have a Mutant Clash, which is like an in-archetype infinite impermanence, with the added benefit of being able to draw you a card if your level 8 or higher mutant destroys an opponent's monster by battle. And then we also have Mutant Cry, which is basically like an in-archetype Tri-Brigade Revolt, I guess. This allows you to fusion summon by shuffling the materials listed on the fusion either from your field, your graveyard, or your banished pile back into your deck. So Cry is just another way to fuse on the opponent's turn, which is pretty crazy. So these are the cards that ST46 has access to, outside of the field spell, of course. But you can kind of see how this starts getting out of hand. Like, that was just a 2-card interaction, and I'm already, like +2 in resources with a spell negate on board, and I have access to either a fusion, an in-archetype Veiler, an in-archetype Itelli, or another fusion, basically. So, like, let's say we search Cry, right? Now you can set the Cry. You can choose to keep your ST46 on field to use as banish fodder for Beast, or you can activate its secondary ability by tributing itself and banishing a card you control or have in your hand. Let's just say we banish the field spell, and now we get to summon out a copy of Mutant Mist, since we banished a spell card for that. So off of a 2-card, basically combo, we ended on a spell negate, a Pot of Greed, with the ability to fuse on the opponent's turn into a synthesis to pop something on their turn as well. And we shuffle resources back into our deck to keep our grind game going. So that's basically like the only combo I have to showcase. Like I said, this deck doesn't have that many combo lines. It's more of a slower, grindier type of duel. You know, it's a control deck, so most of your turns consist of you setting a bunch of back row and passing, and waiting for your opponent to, do stuff. So obviously that's not that easy to showcase or not that fun to showcase. However, despite that being said, I will still try to get a live duel video up with Mutant, possibly against my FA deck, which, for those of you who actually watch my channel continuously, you know that FA is my favorite deck of all time. Fear not, I have been working on an updated FA list post Burst of Destiny. I will be bringing you that list pretty soon. I basically have all the cards I need. I've just been testing it, trying to find the most optimized version of it. So I should be updating my FA deck profile pretty soon on the channel. So stay tuned for that, for those of you guys who are FA fans just like me. But with that being said, this is it, guys. If you're curious about my particular Mutant deck list, feel free to look in the description for the video. I'll leave the link to that profile there. But leave a comment. Tell me what you guys think about Mutant overall. Like the video, subscribe if you haven't already, and thank you guys so much for coming and checking me out. And hopefully you guys have a good evening, and hopefully you guys walked away from this video knowing some stuff that you might not have known before. So with that being said, have a good night, guys.